So, good morning, I would say, for our American friends and Canadian also. Good afternoon for every Europeans here. We have the pleasure to welcome today Justin Mason, Denise Holland, and Christian Gilde from the University of Montana Western, and they will tell you a bit about them, of course, and about how they've been using badges for assessing 21st century skills of students, interns. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for the chance to describe what we've been working on. So greetings to everyone. Our presentation is on a pilot project that we ran this spring of 2020 to use open badges to assess 21st century skills in student interns. I'm joined by Dr. Denise Holland and Dr. Christian Gilde. They are both professors in the Business and Technology Department here at the University of Montana Western. My name is Justin Mason, and I'm the Director of e-learning here at Montana Western. So a quick note about the University of Montana Western. We are a small rural university in southwestern Montana. 16 years ago, we adopted a block scheduling system, making us one of the very first on the block, so to speak. And we are still the only public university in the United States using a block schedule. Students take one course at a time, which we've found creates more room and opportunity for social and experiential learning. So last year, we were awarded a grant from the National Science Foundation to implement a micro-credentialing system here at Montana Western and study it. All of our micro-credentials are supported using the Open Badges technology, the 2.0 standard, and we chose Open Badge Factory as our badge platform. Our business department, and in particular, Dr. Holland and Dr. Gilde, recognized that micro-credentials were an opportunity to add value to an already existing internship course that's been running here for several years. We thought it'd be great if students could be recognized for skills that would both make them more marketable and that for which they weren't currently being recognized. So we thought we'd start with a small set of skills to recognize, and we settled on the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. The idea of the 4 C's was originated with the work of the Partnership for 21st Century Skills to define a list of skills that were thought necessary for success in the coming century. And many organizations have offered their own definitions for these skills. We're actually using definitions that were developed by the AAC&U, which is the American Association of Colleges and Universities. So in what follows, I'm going to try to frame our work on this pilot project as an attempt to navigate some assessment challenges that seem to come with using micro-credentials to make claims about soft skills that are used and demonstrated in informal, unstructured, authentic learning environments. So to begin, and pardon me if this seems like a very abstract question, but what do we mean when we say that a student possesses skills like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, or creativity? It's an important question because how we answer it will impact how we justify our eventual claim in the micro-credential. So let's take collaboration as an example. If we say that a student has good collaboration skills, what is it that we're saying? We're saying that the student, if we're saying that the student possesses knowledge about concepts and terminology that's associated with effective collaboration, then that has implications for how we assess that skill. In that case, we could probably use an essay or even an objective exam to assess the student's knowledge. But generally speaking, I don't think this is what we usually mean when we say that someone has good collaboration skills. The knowledge of terminology and concepts might be a necessary part of that, but in itself is probably not sufficient to make that claim. So what if then we mean that a student not only possesses the knowledge associated with good collaboration, but is also able to apply that knowledge and use those skills in novel contexts and situations? This again has implications for assessment. In this instance, we might design a scenario or a case-based assessment to see if the student can apply their knowledge when faced with a novel situation. And I think this is getting closer to what we mean in our kind of everyday language by good communication skills. And we could really design a micro-credential that made a claim to fit this, right? The student who's earned this has demonstrated the ability to apply knowledge of collaboration skills in novel situations, and that would be warranted. But again, the question is, if we are thinking about a micro-credential that says such and such student has demonstrated good collaboration skills, is that what we generally mean by that sort of claim? So third, let's say that by good collaboration skills, we mean that a student not only possesses knowledge about good collaboration and is able to apply that knowledge to novel situations, but also possesses the disposition or the attitude or the character such that when the student is in an authentic and unstructured environment and is faced with a need to apply those collaboration skills, we could say that the student is perhaps likely to apply those skills. So this again has implications for what we can, for how we would assess. What kind of evidence could we marshal that would warrant a claim that a student can apply and is likely to apply collaboration skills in novel situations? There's precedent for asking this kind of assessment design question about evidence. It's called evidence-centered design, and it basically says that if you want to design as an assessment, start by asking what kind of evidence would count as good evidence. So in our example, what would count as good evidence that a student is not only able to apply collaboration skills in authentic and novel situations, but is likely to do so? That's the question that we asked ourselves in this pilot project. It seemed unwarranted to say that a scenario or a case-based assessment would be sufficient to make such a strong claim. In fact, it seemed like any conventional assessment in a structured environment might be insufficient to make such a claim, because if an assessment lasted an hour and the student realized that they were being assessed, that could alter their behavior. So as far as we could tell, the kind of assessment we were looking for, if it were going to even get close, would at very least have to somehow be administered in an unstructured and authentic environment where a student was likely to face novel situations that called for good collaboration skills. Easily said. But what comes next is really the challenging assessment part. Ordinarily, if we want to assess someone in an authentic context, it means that an instructor or an assessor has to follow the student around and observe their behavior over an extended period of time. And there's plenty of precedent for that kind of assessment, service learning, teacher assessments, but it's very time and resource intensive. Dr. Holland, who teaches our internship course, sometimes has upwards of 50, 60, 70 students in an internship course.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And couldn't possibly travel to all the internship locations and follow them around in order to observe them. In our internship courses here at Montana Western, students find their own placements, so their internships are very diverse and are sometimes hundreds of miles from campus, which hundreds of miles, I realize not everyone here is American, so I think that translates to roughly millions in kilometers. I'm not sure. That was a joke.
Oh.
So the question is, how could we manage such authentic assessment efficiently and at scale? Well, the answer we came up with, obviously, involves the use of open badges, and I think aligns with such educational approaches as open recognition, open and critical pedagogy, or self-directed learning, and maybe heutagogy. We proposed to task the learner with gathering their own evidence, and in so doing, making the learner a sort of co-author of their own recognition and of their own micro-credential. We used an assessment rubric and a competency framework, and OBF's badge application feature to provide structure that was necessary to help students both understand the activity and complete the assessment, yet that was flexible enough to follow students into whatever internship environment they placed themselves in, and to accept whatever forms of evidence they wish to use in their micro-credential, with the feedback from Dr. Holland and based on the constraints that we set up in the OBF badge application. So here's what this process looked like in our first iteration of this pilot project. First, when students enrolled in the internship course, they were told that they would have the opportunity to earn at least 2 micro-credentials for 21st century skills that they would demonstrate while working as an intern. Next, students found their own internship placements. That meant that internship placements were very diverse, happened all over the state of Montana and beyond, and there were varying levels of cooperation from, between employers and the Montana Western faculty. Next, students chose which 21st century skills micro-credential they wanted to earn. Students made that choice based on their personal interest and what sorts of opportunities for evidence gathering their particular internship gave them. From the student's perspective, the entire micro-credential activity appeared to be housed within our learning management system, Moodle. In reality, OBF's badge application tool is integrated with Moodle via a type of API called LTI. When students click on a badge activity in Moodle, they see a list of the micro-credentials they can earn, like a menu. And before students begin the application process, they can click on any micro-credential and see all of the description, instructions, assessment information, rubrics, basically all of the metadata that's contained within the micro-credential. So having looked through the micro-credentials and getting a sense for what they wanted to work on, students begin their internships and then have experiences working as an intern. They reflect on those experiences and identified which experiences, that is, which practices, problems, accomplishments, were instances of them having demonstrated a 21st century skill that they could then use as evidence to support their claim in the micro-credential. They documented and curated those experiences and then connected them to the abstract concepts in the rubric criteria. All the while, they were able to get feedback from their instructor on the evidence they were gathering. And then based on that feedback and their own increasing familiarity with the rubric and the skills they were developing and concepts and the internship itself, they might even experiment with the internship project or their behaviors in order to gather better evidence to support their micro-credential. And I should note that it was not enough for students to simply gather and submit evidence. For each bit of evidence, they had to also supply a narrative explaining why the particular artifact or the data they were submitting counted as good evidence, why it supported their claim to have demonstrated a 21st century skill as an intern. This was both for their metacognitive benefit, but it also was there to help the instructor make sense of the evidence that students submitted. So the process I've described obviously follows a familiar pattern in learning theory. It's Kolb's experiential learning cycle, where we begin with an experience, and then to really make that experience educative, students reflect on the experience, make connections to abstract concepts and theory, finally change their behavior in subsequent experiences in light of their reflections and theory, and then reflect again to see if their experimentations brought about the desired outcome, and the cycle continues. So once students thought that they'd gathered sufficient evidence to support their claim in the micro-credential, they used the OBF application feature to apply for their micro-credential. The instructor reviewed the evidence and then could either issue the micro-credential or respond, sorry, my phone rang, or respond with feedback about how the student could improve the evidence or the narrative. So in this first iteration of our pilot, our students got 2 chances to submit evidence. Okay. So a note about the rubric and competency framework. OBF, the Open Badge Factory, has links to the ESCO competency framework, which is really fantastic. However, we wanted a framework that was more recognized and a bit more widely used in the United States. We did a good deal of searching and reviewing of frameworks and eventually settled on AAC&U's value rubric because it's fairly used in the States and our university was already using it for other projects. So we felt that choosing the right competency framework was very important from the student's perspective. You know, students use one of use these rubrics in the micro-credential to provide guidance and structure for students. Again, the idea is that we are trying to inject structure into an otherwise unstructured learning environment of the internship. But as you can see, AAC&U's rubric is quite detailed, maybe even a bit too detailed and overwhelming for students who are trying to use it. This is a consideration for future iterations of our pilot project, whether we have the right rubric and framework for students. Worth noting again that the structure is not just for students, but it is also to structure the activity for faculty so that they have a somewhat consistent process and format by which to review students' work and provide feedback. Making assessment efficient for faculty is really crucial to making the overall goal of our micro-credential project happen, which is to assess students' soft skills in unstructured and authentic environments, but to do so in ways that are scalable and manageable. And with that, I turn it over to Christian.
Hey, Justin, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I will be talking about our project today in terms of how those 4 C's tie into the internship context and what kind of research design we use in order to make this project happen. Then I will also talk a little bit about how we operationalized our research project and what intentions we have or what future use we foresee for those badges in the internship project at our institution. So like Justin said, like the purpose of this presentation is to show that those 4 C's can be effectively practiced and assessed when employed with internships. When we talk
Excuse
about
me, there's a lot of echo on your mic. Can you check
hear me now?
I can hear you, but there's a lot of echo. Yeah,
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, that's better.
Yes.
Okay, so as I said, we try to use the 4 C's framework for our project, and we talk about it in terms of collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and communications. And it's important to say that students, or especially new employees in the 21st century workforce, have to possess those skills in order to have a successful internship, but also to be successful in college and to have a professional start of their career, but also to be productive citizens. So when you look at the internships, if you look at the entire context, what are internships? When you talk about internships, you're talking about practical experiences, unsupervised experiences, that if this kind of work is meaningful, gives the student a head start when they start their job and they start their professional career. You can think of an internship like when you transition the student from the classroom into the real world, into the working world. And it also gives the company or the employer an opportunity, if a student does a good job with an internship, they actually hire them to integrate them into their workforce. Internships give a lot of opportunities there. They help you hone your technical skills, your analytical skills. They also give you a chance to kind of take a sneak peek or get an insight into an industry that you want to start your job in or your professional career in. They also help you hone creative or adaptable skills and communication skills, networking skills. All of those things that kind of feel like you can see in those 4 C's, and the 4 C's that we use here, the skills that are very important. So if you look at how the internships and the 4 C's tie together, and you see this, that those skills, those tools for the 21st century, those 4 C's especially, they are more and more expected by employers. And if you have a meaningful internship, an internship gives you a real experience. You're working with a real company. You have real stakes there, really monetary implications. You have real challenges, meaning that you have to work on projects that have to come to a successful conclusion for a client or for a customer. And then you have to deal also with real functions, meaning you work with colleagues, with a company, and you have to do this in the professional manner. And if you have all of those real experiences, you gain those 4 C's, this collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and communication skills. You generate something that you can really put on your resume, that you can put in a portfolio, that you can really very good use for your professional career. Justin, could you go to the next slide, please? So another thing that I wanted to briefly talk about is what kind of research design did we use to make this project happen? We looked at a couple of research designs. One was the traditional experimental design, and that was our first departure point. But then we took a closer look at it, and we were thinking about that. And even so, traditional experimental design gives you a lot of control. It's a very convenient, very structured design. We thought that with our makeup, with our exploratory research, it would be better to use something more flexible, more advanced. And then we landed on the design-based research method or makeup. And with design-based researches, you can think of it as experimental design, but rather much more flexible, much more of a process, a circular revolving process. And if you take this design-based research, what you're trying to do is basically you're trying to use evidence-based claims, and you're doing this through you're taking existing theory, you're taking the requirements for an existing design, and you're trying to come up with a good research design. Once you have this good research design in place, what you do is you try to collect your data or do your research, look at the effects that your research has, implement your research, and then analyze it. But while you're doing this research, design-based research gives you an opportunity to redesign kind of those steps or redesign this research while you're working on it, while you're progressing through it. Of course, that gives you a good deal of flexibility, but it also has implications on theory when you undertake those small redesigns while you're doing your research. So when you look at design-based research, design-based research is not really just one approach, it's a series of approaches, and gives you a good deal of flexibility. It tries to put things into the context, and it gives also the researcher a certain flexibility to design it for the context that you use it in. What kind of sample are we looking at when we talk about our particular project? Like Justin said, our institution is rather small. We have 1,400 to 1,500 students. For our project, what we did with our project is we had an internship course or an internship class that we used for this particular project. And we used 15 students for this project. These were all seniors in the last year in college that were almost there to graduate and go out into the professional world. And what we asked them to do is we asked them to pick 2 dimensions of this 4 C's framework and provide evidence for those 2 dimensions, and also provide a narrative for those 2 dimensions. The next thing I will talk a little bit about is about how we operationalized our project. Justin, could you please? Thank you. So one random example might be how we operationalize this research. Might be if you talk about critical thinking. Let's say an internship manager was approaching a student and asking, I want you to come up with a way of making our production process a little bit more efficient. Let's say, like, for instance, working for a small toy manufacturer, and they have to look at those processes. Let's say, like, they totally randomly produce stuffed bears, stuffed animals. And the student is tasked with looking at this production process and making it maybe a little bit more efficient. So when you look at the production process of this toy manufacturer for these bears, what you can do is, in this case, you can use something like a critical thinking method, like the critical path method. What the critical path method does is, it's kind of a tool where you can control and schedule your project activities in a timely fashion and manner. And you look at those all of those activities in a timely sequence, and you're trying to be more efficient. And if you look at, let's say, like, the student's supposed to look at the bear production process, you can do a couple of production steps or production processes at the same time. Let's say, like, in this case, you can cut the clothes, saw the clothes, and embroider the t-shirt for the bear. And that's one sequence of activities, and it takes approximately 30 minutes. Another thing that you can do at the same time when you put this pair together is to cut the accessories of the bear and saw the accessories and put them together. And then you can also, at the same time, you have to stuff the bear, cut the fur, and saw it together. And when you have all those activities put together, in this case, the last activity takes approximately 40 minutes if you add that up. If you have all those 3 activities finished, what you can then do is you can assemble the bear, dress the bear, package the bear, and ship the bear to the customer. So what is the critical path here that you can make more efficient? If you look closely, it's cutting the fur, sawing the fur, and stuffing the bear. It takes approximately 40 minutes. And if your manager asks you, how could you do that? Think about it. How can you make that more efficient? That might be one application of how you can apply critical thinking and how you might be able to earn a badge for this particular area. Another example, could you go to the next slide, Justin? Another example might be if your boss or your manager says to the student or to the intern, you know what, we're a service industry, we're a service company, and we have some problems with some activities within our company. We want to make sure that employees are more satisfied, that they like a little bit more what they do. One process that might help you make this more palatable to the employees, more enjoyable, the activities, is design thinking. And that's, like, that falls into kind of the realm of creativity if you talk about the 4 C's framework. So what the boss or the manager or the intern could say is, like, look at our employees, go through this design thinking process, empathize with them, ask them how they feel about the current processes, figure out what are the challenges and the problems, and define those challenges and problems, and then come up with some ideas how we might solve those problems, how we could implement them and test them with the employees and see if they really work, if they may really make the current situation better. So that might be one application where an intern or a student can earn a badge for creativity because they made the process, in this case, the work process, a little bit better through design thinking. So that also might be a random example. Justin, could you go to the next slide, please? So how do we envision that we use badges in the near future at our institution? And what we were thinking is that we kind of distribute badges throughout our business curriculum, our core business classes, and look at the different classes and see if they have different assignments, different projects that are big enough that would warrant to award a badge. And here's some examples. Let's say, like, you have business communications. if a student puts together a good research proposal, he might be able to get a badge for that in business communications. Or when you talk about operations management, a student could maybe put together a project management plan. He or she would do a very good job there, and that would also warrant to award a badge for the student. Other areas might be leadership class. You can say like you do company analysis, a company leadership analysis, and you could award a badge for that as well if they do something comprehensively, do a good job. You could also award badges, let's say like for someone puts together a business plan for his or her own company and does a good job as well. If they work in a team, let's say like in a management class, or maybe if they do in a business statistics class, if they analyze data for a company and figure out who's the best customer. So these are some things that we were thinking about, that we're trying to use badges throughout our business curriculum and make it a little bit more accessible to the students. With this in mind, I will now hand it over to Dr. Holland, or Denise, and she will talk a little bit about the results, the makeup of the project, and the implications.
Thank you, Justin and Christian. I took over the internship course about 2 years ago, and I was looking to find something that would benefit the students besides just the typical assignments that they do in the course. And Justin happened to come in and do a presentation on micro-credentials to our department, and I thought what a good fit that would be for our students. So that is one reason why I was really intrigued by this project that we are doing today. So the pilot project consisted of 15 students, and we chose the internship course because of two main reasons. Number one, every business student in our program must do an internship. And two, they are usually doing the internship during their junior or senior year. So the majority of their business coursework has been completed by that time. And like Justin had said previously, students find their own internships. So we have students that are completing those internships in Hawaii. They could be in California, Washington, wherever that they choose to find one. So, and they are in all different types of occupations. So we've had students in banks, real estate offices. They work for an outfitting guide business, a farm and ranch, insurance company, and computer companies, just to name a few. So the internships that the students do choose is it's varied. Justin, could you move to the next slide, please? So the requirements for our current internships, our students provide weekly reports where they answer specific questions about their accomplishments that week. What did they learn? Did they have any trouble with anything? How much time did their supervisor spend with them? Just those typical things. How many hours did they work that week? They also then submit a final summary document where they sum up their entire internship together. And then they used to put that into a paper portfolio. Well, when I took over the internships, I thought, oh, what do we do with all these portfolios that we have sitting around that, you know, the students never get back, or, you know, how can they show to their employer, this is what I can accomplish, especially after their internship. So what we did for this project is the students were required to pick 2 micro-credentials to apply for. And the micro-credentials become just another assignment, if you will, for the students. It doesn't override any supervisor evaluations that they might get throughout their internship. So once they decided on a micro-credential, they needed to provide the evidence along with a narrative as to why that evidence showed that they have that skill that they are applying for. And our students submitted items such as brochures they had created and even videos of social marketing posts that they did for a business that they were working for. And one student in particular submitted evidence for a collaboration credential, which also could have worked for a creativity credential. She was doing her internship at an accountant's office, And when the restrictions for COVID-19 came on for our state, they had to come up with a way to get the tax returns back to the customers. So she had done some creative thinking on how to get that done. And she had shown that in her narrative, but she didn't apply for that specific badge, for example. But she could have. The only thing that she didn't do is we had asked them to fill out the design thinking graph, which would have worked perfectly with what she had talked about in her narrative. But it was a great way, excuse me, to show creativity in her thinking. So we use Moodle as our LMS system, and the internships course was set up so that the students could submit the required information through a link to the Open Badge factory. The students found the process of submitting their evidence easy, and the website was very user-friendly. The only issue one student had was submitting a video because it was too large. So they trimmed it down and everything worked just fine. I was able to access it with no problems. So once the students had submitted all their evidence, I received an email that there was something to be evaluated, and overall the website worked very well. So we had no issues with that. Justin, next slide, please. So overall, we had 2 students apply for oral communication and 3 for written communication, 8 for critical thinking, 8 applied for collaboration, and 7 for critical thinking. Next slide, please, Justin. Overall, the students did a fairly good job with the micro-credentials. They did struggle with a few things. So students struggled to understand what micro-credentials were and their purpose. So this was a new term to students. So when the semester started, I got lots of questions regarding this. And what I had asked Justin to do then was to put together a video that we put into Moodle that the students could watch to tell them about what micro-credentials were and then how to apply for those credentials. So that helped a ton with that question. They struggled with finding evidence or what would be good evidence. So they wanted me to provide examples for them, but I don't often do that for students because I want them to use their own thinking in what would provide a good example. And again, we're talking about junior and senior level students. So we are hoping that they should be able to find that evidence to provide. So I did not provide exemplars for them. And then we found that there was a disconnect between the students' classroom knowledge to the application. So being, again, able to find that evidence that fits a critical thinking skill or activity, for example. Next slide, please, Justin. Some of the implications. So the department, we would like to add badges to our core classes like Christian had discussed previously. Have the faculty assist students in their courses to locate evidence. So when they are working in the stats class, our faculty member could say, this is a great example to show evidence that you have this skill with this badge. So you could provide that. Criteria that we are using are examples, are items that the students have heard in their courses before. So for example, we need to talk about the design thinking model in our courses so that the students will understand what that is. Adjust the rubrics to be more open and so for example, the collaborative rubric, we need to adjust that rubric a little bit because our students looked at the rubric and the rubric mainly focuses around meetings and how you would work in a meeting collaboratively when in reality, a lot of the students do not necessarily just sit in a meeting to get things resolved. So we need to open up the criteria for that rubric a little bit more. So the micro-credentials remind me of professional portfolios that we used to require the students to do in the late 80s, early 90s, where the micro-credential takes that place, but still allows the students to show their work to a future employer. So these will allow the students to show their skills to future employers through a link that they can actually view their work and not just see it necessarily on a piece of paper, the students could actually even video themselves describing their evidence that they are providing. So they can show them a presentation that they've done, a commercial that they've directed, or even show them a business plan that they have created. So I believe that this has been a great addition to the internship class, and I look forward to using it each semester after this. So Justin, do you have any closing remarks?
No, just to say thank you to both of you, Denise and Christian. And we have some questions here, so I thought maybe I could read through those, and then folks can chime in their answers. All right. So first question, to what extent was your design influenced by Miller's Pyramid in clinical education? It wasn't, but there's a lot of overlap. So I admit I pulled up Miller's Pyramid when I saw your question, and there is a lot of overlap there. So that is a happy coincidence. Let's see, does this apply only to internship? Does the self-assessment override the employer's evaluation?
No, it does not. Again, it's just another assignment for the students to complete, and hopefully they will get something out of that to be able to show future employers. So no, it does not override any supervisor evaluation.
Maybe worth noting that that employer evaluation could itself count as evidence, right? If
Yes.
a student wanted to include that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Let's see, can you talk more about the formative assessment process using OBF badge applications and how students justified their evidence? Was this in Moodle before applying? Well, I can speak to whether it was in, yeah, so the badge application was in Moodle. Students were able to see all of the instructions, the micro-credential description, rubric, and instructions before applying. And I don't know if any students actually did this, but I thought to myself, it would have been very possible for students to just work on each of these as they go along, and submitting evidence if they wanted to, and then finding out if they and then maybe only clicking submit on one or two of them. It'd be extra work. It's hard to imagine students doing that, but they could. As far as the formative assessment process and how students justified their evidence, would either Denise or Christian, do either of you want to speak to that?
When students applied for their badge, they submitted, of course, their evidence. And like I had mentioned, a student submitted a brochure. And along with that, they had to submit a narrative, because if without the narrative, we wouldn't know exactly what the brochure was, for example, or how it was used. So the narrative gave us that option to read through and be able to decipher what that evidence was that they were presenting. So along with the evidence they presented, we read the narrative, and then I used the rubric to help score what they had presented to us with their narrative and evidence. And a lot of times I had to give feedback to the students that said, look at the rubric that you are applying for, because your narrative does not necessarily reflect what I'm going to score you on with the rubric. So a couple of students, once they took that back, they fixed their narrative, and when they sent it to me, then it was easier to look through their narrative and to see how it went along with the rubric. So.
Thank you, Denise. I see, so Don asks a very interesting, but tough question. Don, do you want me to read that out, or do you want to jump on and ask the question yourself?
Oh, am I there? Right. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, so when is it done? When do they possess the skill? And are they done? Or is it more like the Navajo blanket, which, you know, when it's done, you might as well die? Can you, so in other words, one of the things I say about badges is that they're signals, and you can have weak signals, you can have strong signals, and you can have certifications, you can have certificates. Where do these fit in that sort of spectrum? How confidently do you say this person has this skill? How much evidence is sufficient?
Well, I'll start by saying that we did hedge the claim of in the micro-credential not to say that this person definitely possesses this skill. That was a little bit of a little bit rhetorical, I think, for this presentation, but we want people who view the micro-credential to be able to make that inference on their own. So what our description in the micro-credential actually says is that students have demonstrated such and such skill in the context of an internship. And I don't want to, I mean, Denise or Christian, feel free to chime in. Personally, my thought is that with a lot of these competencies, you're right. You're never done, and it's you know, I've worked on other micro-credential projects elsewhere, not here at Western, where we made claims like that a student has demonstrated that they are proficient email writers. Well, the assessment for that was that they had to write one email. You know, it's not really a justified claim. So yeah, I think that with these, you're right, they're signals, and to my mind at least, it makes sense to kind of think of them in terms of how warranted, you know, a claim is, kind of the weight of a claim. But
and it sounds like you're limiting the context to the internship, which that makes total sense to me. Great, thanks.
Let's see here. Have employers been engaged yet regarding this pilot, these badges? Internship employers or broader workforce? We just finished up the pilot, but, or excuse me, our first iteration of it this spring. But Denise, have we heard back from employers about any of these?
No, of course, the employer isn't responsible for the badge. That is the student's responsibility, and it's my responsibility, I guess, as the faculty member to assess their evidence to see if they have, you know, achieved that skill. So the employer really doesn't have much to do with this badge right now. That is something we could change in the future to have also the employer give some assessment to what the students have, you know, given to us for evidence, or have them have a say in something in regard to assessing what the student has provided. But currently right now, no, the employer is not involved in the assessment of the evidence for the badge at this point, so.
I think we're interested in employer perceptions of these badges. So that
yes.
might be a research question for a future iteration of the
yes.
pilot.
How long?
Yeah, Jitney has a question, but he says, yeah, please, by all means, join in and ask your question.
Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Robert, and I'm from Collège La Salle, the La Salle College in Montreal. We have 4,000 students, plus about 11 branches all across the world. Initially, I got involved with the open badge system, but later on I dropped it because I saw it in some way we are a little bit more advanced than just giving out badges. Let me explain to you how. Our students go through a preparatory stage for about 15 weeks. where they're learning how to behave at the workplace, etc., how to create their CVs and so on. Once they go out to work, some of them are being paid, some of them are not being paid. But in all times, they're considered to be interns. During the internship, they submit every week, at the end of the week, a daily schedule, a logbook, basically a logbook that shows exactly what they have been doing during the week. So it's separated, Monday, Tuesday, and so on. The rubrics there means what have you done today? What innovation have you brought to the company? What have you learned personally from the thing? And do you have any other comments on your internship? So every day they have to fill this out. At the end of the week, they send it in to be evaluated. I feel that this logbook itself is a badge already. In other words, if I would be an employer and the student comes to me with a logbook that shows me all the things that he has done, he or she has done during the internship, for me, this would be much more meaningful than an actual badge that is a theoretical thing that the student by himself assessed instead of having created evidence, written evidence on it. The logbook, in some instances, I insist that the logbook will be signed by the employer, which gives an extra oomph to it. In some instances, when I know who the employer is, I don't insist necessarily to have that. I would like to have your comments on it. First of all, about the students that are being paid. Our internship ranges anywhere between 4 weeks to 3 months, depending on the faculty where they are. So the students, the elementary students, go for 6 weeks, and the other ones, more advanced ones, go for 3 months on internship. Basically, I don't call even the longer ones internship, we call them apprenticeship. Remember, we're coming from a bilingual college, so it's a little bit different. So I would like to have your input on that, what I just mentioned.
Okay, thank you for your question. So our internship works on credits, and the minimum number of credits that a student can take an internship for that's required for the degree is 6 credits. And the students work 40 hours for every credit. So 6 credits equals, of course, 240 hours that they must work. They usually do their internship all semester. And sometimes with our block system, students can actually do an internship that is 3 blocks, for example, depending on how many credits they are taking it for. So it varies. Regarding that, but we tell students you can either get an internship or that's paid or unpaid. Most of them, of course, like a paid internship, but that isn't required. So it's totally just depends on what the students get. And as far as them doing evidence regarding the micro-credentials versus a non-paid or paid internship, I don't really think that has any influence on it personally. But that could be totally, someone else could think differently. And then you talked about the log, and that is one of the things that we do have our students still do. They don't necessarily break it down by day. They answer the questions according to the full week. But those are some of the same questions that you had mentioned are what our students answer as well. So I'm not sure if did I answer all of your questions?
How long is your internship actually?
Well, it depends. So it just works on hours. So, so for 6 credits, if the students want 6 credits, they have to work 240 hours. And that can vary. So if a student gets a full semester, which is 16 weeks, they can stretch those hours over all 16 weeks if they choose to do so.
That includes the training for the internship, or just the actual working time?
That also, if the employer needs to train them, that's included in their working hours.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Your comment about that the log itself is something that, you know, can serve as evidence. Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, it reminds me of there was a debate from several years back. I don't know if for those of you on Twitter, Alan Levine, Cogdog, wrote a post about I don't need a badge to say that I've written blog posts. I have blog posts that show that. It's a great point. I think that my take on badges for a while now has been that, you know, in some ways they are useful because they're a standardized way to make claims about yourself or about other people. You know, with the blogging example, you know, someone could point to the blog, and if someone had time, they could read through all the blog posts. But if I wanted to make a claim that, you know, like I've written a blog and I have X number of subscribers, or I have such and such following and I've made significant contributions to such and such topic, that's something that a badge might actually be really useful for me to kind of format that claim and put that claim out there, which people could then look at. But I also, we're at the top of the hour, so it's an interesting topic that we could probably spend a lot of time talking about, but I will shut myself off right there.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let's see here. I think that's all of the questions, unless there are any others. Did I miss anyone? Any questions? Oh, as far as I know, I have not been checking whether students have been using the portfolio features on the Open Badge Passport yet. Now that the semester is over, this is on my list of things to do, is to kind of try to track how students are using the micro-credentials that they've earned. All right, well, I think, Eric, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I was saying that perhaps what could be very interesting to, I would say not complete, but to add a new level in your approach would be to have the employers involved in the process of endorsing the badges. It would be the final touch on because you would get the employers basically validating at the end, not the whole process, because you have done and your students have done a lot of the process, but basically, yeah, endorsing at the end the badge. The other thing that in Open Badge Passport, there is a possibility to enrich the badge later also. So this badge could be basically the beginning of a process of a pathway that you could, after getting a badge, getting more endorsement and perhaps adding more evidences, even they are not anymore assessed by your organization. But yeah, so perhaps next steps. I don't know.
Yes.
It was a very, very, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. I was very intrigued, very interesting of the fact that you really involve the students. It's not only the assessment, you know, in the teacher side, okay, produce something and we will assess, but the fact that you had the competence framework involved, that they had to reflect, they had to, it was basically, I think it's a quite demanding process to basically produce this evidence. So big work was done on the evidence side, and usually, in many cases, people just think that, okay, well, there is one evidence, get it and try to assess it, or, you know. So it's very interesting, this balance, I would say, between assessments and evidences. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure that, I mean, we will tweet about this very interesting presentation. I'm sure that a great number of people will have a look on it, and perhaps we will have in the future more, I would say, questions or comments.
I look forward to it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.